Let's say we have this blue line and we want to figure out the equation of the line. So the general equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. And the unknowns in this are the m, which is the slope, and then the b, which is the y-intercept. So if we find those two unknowns, intercept. So if we find those two unknowns, then we can figure out the equation of the line, and perhaps we can figure out values and predict values by plugging in predict y values by plugging in x values. Let's go ahead and try to do this. So the first step is to figure out a slope. And before we do that, we need to find a few points on this line that we are sure of. So if you have 2 points on a line, then you're able to connect them and make a line. So in this case, if we have 2 points, then we're able to algebraically solve for the slope. So let's go ahead and figure out 2 points. So the first point is 0, 1. So this looks like it's on the line, so we're going to write that. So we have the point, let's write it right here. So we have 0, 1. And that's our first point. Let's see if we can find one more point that we're sure of. So it looks like 1, 2 is another point. So 1, 2. So we have another point that we're sure of. And now we're good. We can figure out a couple other points, but 2 is enough. So let's go ahead and start. So the first step is to find m, which is the slope. So we have m, and I'm sure you've heard of this equation. So we have m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And what these mean are, these are the y values of our points, so you can label them accordingly. So we have, let's just call this point 1. So this is point 1. Let's write it right here. So point 1. So we're going to call this x1 and y1. Let's call this right here point 2. So we're going to call this x2. So x2 and y2. And what this means is just the x-coordinate of the point and the y-coordinate of the point. This is the first point, so we call it x1 and y1. The second point, we call it x2 and y2. So now we can plug in the values. So we have y2 minus y1. And you can do it the other way. You can call this point 1 and call this point 2. You just have to be consistent with it. It would work out the same. So we have y2 minus y1, which is 2 minus 1 over x2 minus x1. So we have 1 minus 0. So let's go ahead and solve this simple fraction. So 2 minus 1 is just 1. 1 minus 0 is just 1 as well. So it looks like our slope is just 1. 1 over 1. So m equals 1. So right now we're pretty much halfway done. So let's make a box around that. So what else do we need? So let's check off the slope. So now we need to find one more thing, which is the b value, or in other words, the y-intercept. So we can figure this y-intercept out by simply looking at the graph in this case. You can't do this in all cases because the y-intercept could be like in the middle of 1 and 2 and you won't be sure of where it crosses the y-axis. But in this case, it's pretty evident that it crosses the y-axis at 1, or at 1. So at 1, this line crosses the y-axis. So let me give you an example where it wouldn't be 1. For example, let's say the line goes like that. In this case, the y-intercept would be 5, because at 5, the x is 0. In other words, at 5, it crosses the y-axis. So in this case, our y-intercept is, let's write it right here, our y-intercept is 1. And so we already have the b value, and we already know that y-intercept is the b value, so we already know that's 1. But let's try to figure it out some other way. Let's say we didn't know that it's 1. Let's try to figure it out. Let's try to figure it out algebraically. So we have the slope, right? So we said the slope was 1. So let's rewrite the equation with the slope plugged in. So we have y equals 1x, instead of m, we're putting 1 because we know m is 1. So 1x plus b. And now we have to notice that we have 2 points available to us. So we can use any of these 2 points to figure out this unknown value. So because if you have you have one variable in a linear equation, then you're able to solve for that one variable. So let's go ahead and do that. We can use, let's use the second point. So we're going to plug in the x and y values and solve for b. So this point says the x value is 1 and the y value is 2. So let's plug it in. So we have 1 times 1, because again the x value is 1, plus b is equal to the y value, which is 2. Okay, so now we have a very simple linear equation, and we can just isolate b and we'll solve for b. So let's go ahead and do that. 2 equals 1 times 1 is just 1, plus b. We subtract 1 from both sides. Sorry, that doesn't cancel. 1 and 1 cancel. 2 minus 1 is 1. So b equals 1. And you might notice that we got the same exact value. So now let's do the same thing we just did again with the other point. I just want to prove to you that both points work. So again, we have right in the same color. So again, we have y equals 1x plus b. So now we're going to use the other point to do so. So we're going to plug in 0 and 1. So we have 1 in this case. I'm going to use yellow. So now we have 1 equals 0 times 1 plus b. Simplify and solve for b. So we have 1 equals 0 plus b. Well, 0 plus b is just b, so b equals 1 once again. So now we have our b value and our m value. So now we can just rewrite the linear equation and we'll be done. So we have y equals, and in this case the m value and the b value were 1, but that's just a coincidence. They're not always the same. So y equals 1x plus 1. And this right here is our linear equation that represents that line.